The Houses Digital podcast is where Australia's tech future takes shape. Welcome to the front line of Australia's digital revolution. Today we're talking with Aaron Violi, the federal member for the seat of Casey and the Shadow Minister for the Digital Economy. Aaron, thank you for coming on the Houses Digital podcast. It is a pleasure to see you. You are the Minister for the Digital Economy. You are also the member for Casey.
Yes.
You've got a lot on your plate. My first question, and I know I'm not even slowing down straight up. What's the path here? How did you get to Minister of the Digital Economy?
Yeah, well, Shadow Minister, hopefully Minister in the future. But it's an interesting journey. So I got elected in 2022. So this is my second term now. So quite quick to get to the Shadow Ministry, which is exciting. Prior to politics, I've always had a passion and interest in digital economy. I worked in the corporate sector for 15 years. But the real reason I'm in politics is that I had a passion to be the member for Casey, to represent my community where I grew up. I'm a third generation local, and fundamentally I see my role as being the voice for my community and making my community's life better. But what I know is that the only way Casey can be strong as a community is if the country is strong. And through my lived experience and through my work in the private sector, I've seen that the opportunity in technology and in the digital economy to unlock and solve the challenges we face is profound and unparalleled. And so for my community to be strong, I passionately believe that we need the country to be strong, and for the country to be strong, we need to embrace technology and we need to get it right. We need to get the balance right, because there is a level of social contract to make sure we're not leaving people behind, but we're providing a greater good for our society. And that's what politics is about, making tough decisions to get the balance right. Because I always say that if it's an easy decision and it's straightforward, well, we've already made the decision. It's not controversial. Politics at its core is about priorities, about choices, and about trade-offs. And if we get the trade-offs and the priorities and the choices right with technology, we will have a stronger, more cohesive, more productive society. And if we get it wrong, the impacts can be profound on so many people at the community level or the national level. So that's what drove me to get into politics, was the belief that with my lived experience, I could make a difference in Casey and make a difference for the country.
And it's really interesting, technology is evolving at pace. And you talk about, there is a risk of people getting left behind, and already they are. The older generation, there's an expectation that they can access certain apps or to communicate with government in certain ways. It's really hard. That access to technology and that understanding is really hard. But everything, it's exponential, right? But there's also that massive opportunity, because obviously, if we do it right, we can keep up with the rest of the world. We've got that economic opportunity, those efficiencies through different technologies as well. The Australian tech stack, I think, is really important. I think you've got a big job ahead of you, just to support that tech stack. For those who are at risk, I guess, of being left behind, some of the older generation, and you would know in Casey as well, there are an older demographic.
Correct.
There.
Yes.
So how do you support that?
It's a very important question, and it's one of the key questions. We can't leave people behind, and we need to understand that people go on different journeys. Even myself at 41, there's new technology that my 12-year-old son's looking at, and I'm like, whoa, I already feel like it's passing me by. And we get a lot of people come into my office, older people with concerns around trying to access Services Australia, and they're like, we try to talk to someone, no one will talk to us. They direct us to online. I can't use email. So we need to put the safety net in place in terms of those that don't and are unwilling to use digital assets. That we should support that. They have to be able to speak to a person, walk into a centre. A controversial topic sometimes is cash, and making sure. And I'm passionately believe that those that want to use cash should absolutely have access to cash. We shouldn't be forcing people onto digital technology. there'll be a natural evolution as my generation and others. As the younger generations grow, there'll be more people that are naturally digitally native. We can't chase the efficiencies at the cost of older Australians or any Australian that doesn't want to use a digital technology. So opt-in is so important, and having the ability for people to get the same level of service, the same needs met through a manual world or an analog world is so important.
And I think there's also, if we envision ourselves, we're not going to be in our 40s forever. We're going to be, in those aged care facilities, and we'll be relying on our young people. But technology will probably surpass us as well, and probably leaving that legacy of supporting the older generation for our own benefit as well.
History says we all get older, and the technology changes and it surpasses us, and we move. We all have a point in our life where we realise we're no longer the younger generation. It's part of the journey of life. But correct, as we get more complex, as we get more benefits, there's big questions we need to ask about. Well, how do we operate as a society? But this isn't new. These challenges are not new. If you look through the Industrial Revolution, you look through people don't talk a lot about the agricultural revolution. If you look through that, my family came from farming, and you used to plough the fields by hand and by horse, and then tractors and other tools came along. And that was a huge technological shift in the way we produce food. And history has shown that when we have big technological revolutions like we're living through now with digital and AI, there will be change, there will be disruption. But in the long term, if we get it right, society will be better. So that's what I look at. How do we help support people through the journey and make sure as a society we are stronger in the future?
Yeah, and I think even with agriculture, I know we're deviating from the digital economy, but I've been watching the technology even in that space, with the sensors and the tracking and the tracing. It has transformed the agricultural industry. Correct. Australia is better for it. Our exports are magnificent, really.
Well, I was just going to say, I think it's important how we define the digital economy. So when I think of the digital economy, and when I think about my new role as the Shadow Minister, how I look at it, and I'm interesting, I've got science, technology and innovation, the digital economy and cybersecurity, and I look at them as three different areas. And science, technology and innovation is about how do we encourage research and development, new products like Wi-Fi, Bluetooth. Australia's got a great history. So how do we support creating new products? But then importantly, the shift from science and technology goes to the digital economy, which is how do we commercialise it? How do we roll it out at scale here in Australia and across the world, and really bridge the death valley of cash flow and move from academia to commercialisation? And then cybersecurity is crucial. How do we protect people's data? How do we support society? And how do we keep critical infrastructure safe? So I've separated out to those sort of three, but the reason it's important to separate them out is agriculture is part of the digital economy. So if I go a level deeper, when I look at the digital economy, I look at two areas. There's the tech sector, which I was part of at Ritual, and many people are part of, I guess, tech products in the tech sector. But ultimately what the tech sector is doing to be successful is creating products that make the real world, for want of a better term, more efficient. And I've seen through my career and just watching the sector that the best products, like Canva as an example, are ones that are a tech product, but they're actually making life easier. I hate the term real world, but let's call it the real world. And that's how they're successful. So you look at farming, farmers are using drones to monitor their crops where they previously had to do it manually. In my community, there's a wonderful organisation called Cherry Hill, which is one of the biggest cherry growers in Australia, and they export overseas. They're now using artificial intelligence to grade and sort their cherries. And what that means is they're getting greater throughput with the same number of people, better quality control. So consumers are getting better product at a lower price, and it's allowing them to export overseas and actually employ more people. So agriculture, mining, other industries that can be seen as quite, I don't want to say primitive, but, there's that hands dirty miners. They're high-tech industries now. So how does the digital economy create its own ecosystem that is ultimately supporting the wider economy? That's when we get the true benefits around productivity, higher wages, lower unemployment, because the only way, we can deliver those three things around higher wages that are sustainable, which we all want, low unemployment, and strong economic growth is through productivity. And the most sustainable way to get productivity is through technology and the digital economy.
And I think that speaks to the intersection as well. I know that we look at supply chain, for example, and we know that there's blockchain in supply chain, there's AI agents in supply chain, there's reporting back and forth. And as a consumer, we often want to know what's the origin? Like, is this really organic? Did this really come from Australia? There's an Australian stamp on here, but is that true? And that source of truth is becoming really important. So when you talk about the digital economy, I absolutely 100% agree, because it is an economy of people and the way we engage with our products and our services. And at the end of the day, that efficiency is so important to Australia right now, more than ever, I think.
Well, it's the only way. The only way we can keep delivering long-term higher wages that are sustainable without driving inflation is through technology. And the reason I talk about the goal of long-term higher wages is because that means you've got low unemployment. So we want people in work. We need people in work. And let me give one example of how technology in my career, this is one of the reasons I'm so passionate about it. When I started at a local food manufacturer called Yarra Valley Snack Foods 15, 16 years ago now, doesn't feel like that long ago. But when I started straight out of university, I was a sales rep. So I would visit independent supermarkets and take their orders and sell them new products. We were literally back then, I had cardboard cards with the products listed. I would write them in and I'd go and visit 15, 20 stores a day, write them in for 8 hours, take them to the office. The next day, a lady would manually enter them into a computer system, which would then print out an order form, and another staff member would manually pack it, and then a delivery driver would come that afternoon, pick it up, take it to the store, give them a manual piece of paper, tick it all off, bring the invoices back. Our team would then invoice them, and then you would chase the supermarkets to get it. So it was like 4-day turnaround from order to invoicing. And I had to drive, lucky I lived in Lilydale where the factory was, but I had to drive back to Lilydale every night to physically drop the cards off. We then went, and I laugh about it now. No one would be, I hope no one's doing that these days. We then moved to Palm Pilots. By the time I'd left the company.
Palm Pilots.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, we had the little pen.
Oh, my goodness.
I know this is, and there's a couple of interesting stories here. And, I was only the sales rep for about 12, 18 months. By the time I left the company, I was running the sales team. We'd set up systems where we had iPads where they were literally one order, it would flow through the system. It was so much more efficient. That's where we got to at the end. But the two things, the big lessons for me there was, that's a great example of how we became more productive. And so we kept the same number of employees. We didn't, this idea that every time there's new technological innovation, you're going to lose roles doesn't always stack up in, because we needed a person in the store. We needed a salesperson. We needed a delivery driver. We needed administrative staff. So we got greater efficiencies. We could do more. But also as a small business, when I started at that company, we had 7 to 11 employees between full-time and part-time. It was a bit fluid. When I left 7 years later, we got bought out by private equity. We're about 130 employees. We'd grown exponentially, but we were late adopters to technology because the owner of the company had so much going on that the last thing he thought about was, well, I could use this Palm Pilot or iPad to get greater efficiencies. He had bigger issues. So that's part of what I think about in this role. How do we make it easier and more accessible for small businesses and business owners that are juggling 1,000 things? They can get efficiencies, but they don't have the time necessarily to think about whether they can invest in it. And so how do we create incentive systems through government that if they do invest, there is an immediate payback through the tax system potentially, because that just gives them that extra incentive to go, all right, I'm going to look at this because it should give me efficiencies and I can get an incentive in the short term through tax, things like that. So, yeah.
Oh, I think that's really important as well, because the use of technology also becomes a competitive advantage. And there are some businesses, the construction industry is an example, they're just not into technology,
Yes.
particularly the trades. We need so many more trades. It's hard to run a business as a tradie. But there's an opportunity, obviously, for the government to enable our small businesses with incentives for using digital technology. But how do we manage that? Because there's also a problem with Australians being able to innovate and the investment, and there's a little bit of a talent deficit here in Australia. So, what do you think would be, I guess, the biggest opportunity here in Australia for retaining talent?
Yeah, it's a big question, and it's a challenge for Australia in the sense that we are a relatively small market. So you look at the big success stories, the Afterpays, the Atlassians, Canvas. You have to service the global market, and I worked at Ritual, which was a Toronto head office was Toronto. We were in Australia. It was very hard to manage the time differences. We had a lot of phone calls at 7 a.m. on a Saturday, which is fine. But if you flip it, we've actually got some really unique advantages. So obviously stable democracy, great lifestyle, great wages. From an engineering perspective, if our engineers are working on a Monday here in Australia, it's actually Sunday in the US and North America. So you can be working on a product ahead of time. We got caught with the company I was at where I won't bore you with the details, but they decided to shut down the whole platform at midnight in Toronto. And because we were a new market in Australia, they hadn't realised that was 12 o'clock at lunchtime, literally the morning or the day of our biggest promotion as a new company. So the system was down for 15 minutes at lunchtime. So the time differences are a challenge, but it can be an opportunity. And one thing that I want to spend some time investigating how we can do this better, and I lived it through Ritual, is things like employee share schemes. So how can we allow employees to have a part of the business as well? Because if you look at a societal level in Australia, it's harder and harder, and some would argue almost impossible now to generate wealth through home ownership. And young people are seeing that there's not a world where they can generate wealth through home ownership. And there's an argument, well, is that the right thing to do? And we need to have that conversation. But if you're a young entrepreneurial person that wants to get ahead, you're looking to work, again, I'll use them at the Canvas, the Atlassians. You want to get in on the next big thing because you can create wealth through stock options and taking shares. And there's dual benefits to that. If the business takes off, you create wealth for yourself and your family, which many then reinvest into the sector. But it ties the employee and the employer and the company together. And the success of the company is shared with everyone. And it drives great motivation. Why wouldn't you want to go that extra mile? Because you're investing in your future, not just someone else's. So I think there's some things we can do, because I know, talking to the chief financial officer when I was at Ritual, they found it quite difficult to offer stock options and those kind of things in Australia. So I've got to dive deeper. I'm not going to profess to have the answer today, but that's certainly an area that I want to look at in this role and work with people like Senator Hume and Tim Wilson and others to go, how can we make the system easier so that if employers want to and employees want to take it up, they can have an ownership share or, profit share, things like that, without the tax implications being so prohibitive in the short term that it's not worth it.
And I think that's hard on the tax side. I'm not sure how they're going to navigate that. Probably another question for another time.
It won't be easy. That's why I'm flagging. It's a conversation I think we need to have internally. And there's certainly no solution. But if you think about it, if you can unlock that, it's just building opportunities for everyone, which is what we need to create in an aspirational entrepreneurial society.
When I worked at IINet 20 years ago or so, I was working for Michael Malone, one of the biggest entrepreneurs in Western Australia. He incentivised it was they won multiple customer service awards in telcos. But when, we were, as staff during the onboarding, we were offered shares and incentivised, and the way that it was like a family there. It was probably one of the most productive working environments I've ever worked in. And I think that comes from that entrepreneurial mindset which is we're all in this together. Let's build together. We've got to have the grit, and we've just got to keep working forward. But I know that back then, and I've always had a similar view, that you need to incentivize your staff, keep them there,
Correct.
Allow them to grow and build the wealth. So, and I remember leaving II now, unfortunately. I went to a different company, but I looked at my shares and I was like, I'm really glad that I spent 4 years at that company, because even on my exit, I had something to show for that.
Correct. And large organisations do this already. So my brother works for one of the retail groups with Wesfarmers. So shares is part of their remuneration package. So it's, larger. We talk, some of the challenges smaller businesses face. Well, larger organisations are doing this. We just need to investigate, is it possible? Because it just, again, if we can align incentives, and if the business wins, the employees win, the country wins. So let's see if that's possible to do. It is complicated, but things worth changing to make a tangible difference aren't easy.
No, and I think an innovative mindset at the government level is also really important if you want Australians to be innovative. So it's such a really good point. So what plans you're new in the role.
Yes.
What are your hopes and dreams?
I'm very conscious that while I've got my own experience and I've been engaging with the community over the last 4 years, I was the co-chair of the Parliamentary Friends of Tech and Innovation and working with a lot of stakeholders. Well, the world moves so quickly in this space. So the first objective is to really get out and continue to talk to industry bodies, to those in the sector, to talk to the wider corporate sector and see what because as in farmers, tradies, large organisations, consulting, what's happening in the real world, and things move so quickly. I spoke in my first speech about the speed of technological change relative to the slowness of government legislation regulation. So the first thing is continue to deep dive into where the industry's at, try and project where we're going to be in a couple of years, because ultimately that's the thing, put policies in place for the next election, because where we are today from a technological perspective will change to where we are in 18 months or 2 years. So focusing on that. So then I bring it back to always thinking about, well, first principles. And I don't know, no one knows what the future is going to be. And I
was going to say that.
Yeah.
What are you planning for?
So the way I approach it, Jeff Bezos at Amazon used to talk about this, and I read in an article and it's really stuck with me. He never knew what the future held for his company, but he knew two things. Consumers would never complain about getting their products quicker and getting it cheaper. And I'm like, exactly right. So if I think about this opportunity in this role, what do I know for sure? The Australian community are not going to complain about higher wages, lower inflation, lower unemployment. So that's what I want to deliver, be able to play a role in delivering from an economic perspective, is paying more people more wages, but it's got to be sustainable so we don't drive inflation. So we want lower inflation, and then we want to keep people in jobs so they've got good, high-paying jobs. And that's sort of the foundation of society and the foundation of an economy. And then I go to, well, how do we achieve that? Well, it's through productivity. And productivity is not, in my mind, about making people work longer hours or work harder. It's like, how do we deliver the same output in less hours or more output in the same hours so people can get home and spend time with their families? Or again, if you're working in a company and you own shares in it and you're delivering better outcomes and there's better profits, you're all gaining. So they're the principles I think about. How do we unlock economic growth? How do we unlock productivity? Protecting workers. And also it's really important that we acknowledge that for technology to be rolled out at scale, there is a capital investment, there is money that needs to be spent, and we need to acknowledge that whether it's VCs, banks, other organisations that are putting capital into the industry, they deserve rightly a return on that investment and a sustainable and profitable return on that investment, because they are taking a risk. There's no guarantee that it's going to deliver a return for them. So we need to make sure that those that invest their capital into technology and into the markets can return a fair and a reasonable profit. So then they'll continue to reinvest into the system. So you only deliver those three principles by finding this nice balance.
And part of that investment environment is the regulatory settings.
Yes.
Because there are international institutional players who are looking at investing in Australian businesses, and they are eager to. As an industry association, I have international businesses who become members and don't quite want to announce it yet because the regulatory settings aren't quite right.
Yeah.
But there's so much interest in Australia. We live in paradise.
Correct.
We have so many opportunities. Australians want to be more productive. So I think on the regulatory settings front, is there appetite from yourself as the Shadow Minister for Digital Economy to aid that or to support that?
Absolutely, absolutely. And we need to look and understand, it's almost the Goldilocks effect of what is it taking away regulation? Is it providing more to provide certainty? And so the feedback I receive and have received for the last 4 years from a lot of businesses is a level of frustration bordering on anger when it comes to AI in particular, that they don't have the certainty to invest. So what do businesses need? They need certainty that if they're going to put significant money into a product or an idea, that in 2 years' time it's not going to be ruled illegal and they're going to lose that money. So providing that certainty to business is crucial. And we have seen a real paralysis from this government, to be frank, over the last 4 years, in my opinion. You know, they looked at their first step was the Safe and Responsible AI paper, which I was critical of because it focused exclusively, other than one line, on the risk of AI. And I always say, if you look at the risk of driving to the supermarket without weighing up the benefits of buying your groceries and getting home, you'd never drive to the supermarket. So looking at just the risk of AI was the wrong approach. It then came to a conclusion that wasn't really a conclusion. Let's build something else and have an advisory group develop some principles. And then within the internal machinations of the government, there was a change of, people left their roles, new people came in. And then again, we've got the report last year, which was really a report to say we're going to do more with no real tangible outcomes. And so I feel and I hear this frustration. And so we're at the point where we go, we need to give business certainty, because the other thing that they need certainty to invest in Australia, because Australia is an attractive market, but we also need to understand where we stand in the world, and our population isn't large relative to Asia, to Europe, to North America. So if we don't create the right frameworks for businesses to invest with confidence and see the opportunities, they won't, because you don't need to. If you're a global multinational, Australia is not a must-have market. And I feel sometimes, having worked in multinationals like Mars Australia and a tech startup, that I understand that perspective, whereas some people in Parliament that haven't had a global corporate or just global experience don't quite understand that if we get it wrong, businesses just won't come and they won't invest because they don't actually need to, given the size of our market. So if we put up too many barriers, we're going to lose those investments. And if we lose the investments, it's the Australian people that suffer because they lose access to those technologies and those opportunities in their world, whether it's at home, watching sport, being with their families. They lose that technological opportunity.
And Australians are looking to the government at the moment for guidance. And it's actually, young people are building AI tools
It's happening already.
We can't stop it. The way that we leverage from it, I think, is really important. But Australians are asking government, what are we going to do about AI? I mean, there are risks there, but also what can we build? Can we own our own AI? Can we have our own AI infrastructure rather than leaning on, the infrastructure from overseas, which is a risk in itself, cyber risk?
Correct. Yeah, and they're the questions that aren't being answered at the moment. Do we want to build our own infrastructure? Do we want to keep it here? I know sovereign, you look at Singapore, and I know when I was at Ritual, we weren't able to launch in Singapore, or we delayed our launch in Singapore and focused on Hong Kong in 2018 because of the data laws in Singapore were so restrictive around, we wouldn't have been able to send the data back to Toronto to the data science team. So you've got to understand that if you put too many barriers up, it can inhibit that growth. But equally, you don't want to trade off our national security and our sovereignty. You've got to get that balance right. But acknowledging that the AI revolution is not even coming, it's already here. And it's moving at pace through, again, North America, through the US, through China, through Europe. Countries are going down this path, and you got to face into it. No decision is a decision, and it actually delivers worse outcomes. So we've got to start leaning in more and trying to get that balance right.
Like you say earlier in the conversation, you experienced that globalization. You were in Australia, you were working for a US company, the time zones interfered a little bit with your launch, but we are really going global.
Yes.
So the way that we interact with other international, institutional, global players is going to become greater and greater over the next decade.
Correct.
So we will become, as Australians, reliant in some ways to some of these institutional players. So I think the writing is on the wall there. But when it comes to, as the Shadow Minister for the Digital Economy, you have to think about that cyber.
Correct.
So what, if you could, I guess, map out some of the focus points or the priorities?
Well, when you look at a cyber perspective, we've seen it in terms of the vulnerabilities we have. And I just want to touch on that point, and I'll go to cyber quick. But one of the things one of the ministers or shadow ministers I work with in industry, Andrew Hastie, has talked about is our sovereign capability. So we are in a global world, and we are absolutely going to be part of a global world, particularly as we're more interconnected than ever through technology. But we do need to have sovereign capability, and advanced manufacturing, which is technology and digital, is a crucial part of that. And the way I look at cybersecurity is we need that sovereign capability from a cyber perspective. So we need to ensure that we are protecting our critical infrastructure, but then we need to ensure that Australians have faith and have trust that if their information is online, that it's protected. And so how do we protect their data? How do we protect Australians from scams? We're seeing that more and more. And there's a real obligation we need to look at in a digital world on when it comes to scams, like the platforms. So they're a key conduit between the scammers. And it used to be you'd get the phone call or you get the email. You're now getting ads popping up that are showing different celebrities supporting different, and someone clicks on it and away they go. And you look at the algorithms and you look at the technology advancements that Meta and others can do. Well, I fail to see a world where they can't sort of clamp down on that. So that's a part of cyber is scams, and how do we stop scams? But then how do we make sure people are safe and secure? How do we make sure our infrastructure is secure? Because it goes back to sovereign capability. It goes back to national security, that in a modern world, cyber is now a warfare domain. So it used to be land, sea, and air. We now have land, sea, air, cyber, and space. And so we need to acknowledge that, and we need to think about, there was, CrowdStrike, when that sort of failure happened a few years ago. I remember I was quite lucky that I was literally about to take off from Adelaide. I'd been at a conference and my wife texted me and said, are you okay? Are you coming home? I'm like, yes, I'm just about to take off. All good. So we took off. Another person at the conference was on a plane 45 minutes. The next plane to Melbourne didn't get back for 24 hours. And so that's an example of why cybersecurity is so important, because as we talk about these productivity gains, these benefits, we're actually so connected now that it unfortunately provides a level of fragility if we're not prepared and we don't put those protective barriers up. And so we need to acknowledge that. And so that's what I think about from a cybersecurity perspective. All the upside we have doesn't work if we don't keep it safe. And if we can't keep it safe, the community won't come for the journey and we lose the upside, because the upside and the opportunities is twofold. It's about business investing, it's about capital, it's about workers. But the other part to that is the social contract and the social license of the community wanting and accepting that this transformation is in all of our benefits. And if they think that they can't get their money out of the bank, they can't go to the shops, they can't get home from flights, then they're going to lose the trust in that. So that's where cyber becomes so important from that perspective of the trust of everyone in the system, and recognising and acknowledging there are bad actors in the world, whether it is nation states or private criminal organisations that are constantly, as we're talking now, there will have been hundreds, if not thousands, of potential attempts of cyber breaches on our national critical infrastructure and also on people's personal data. That's the world we live in today. There's still a level of complacency, I think, in the community, and you hear some interesting stories about passwords, and still the weakest links in chains are generally people in terms of passwords or USBs, things like that. So then I go another layer around cybersecurity, and you would hope, and we need to put high standards on our largest organisations, but then obviously small businesses just don't have the infrastructure and support and resources to continue to invest in. Like, they don't have a chief cyber officer. But if a small growing, particularly tech startup, wants to interact with a larger business that's then working with, say, AUKUS or something like that, well, they need the same level of support. So how we can help those smaller startups be cyber secure, but even every smaller business be cyber secure, is very important, again, because the weakest link is the one we need to support the most as we continue to grow.
I think software as a service and security as a service, and I envisage that would be that would just be a part of the government services. We've had a lot of physical government services, since the beginning of time, but we do have the necessity of that service. So there are a couple of startups, security as a service, at the moment who are looking for investment, and they probably will be quite successful because there's a massive scams issue at the moment. And I mean, I know some people who are head of IT at big multinational companies. Their targets are usually new staff members because they're the most vulnerable. And then we look at the life cycle of a scam, and then there's multiple different stages that people go through across multiple different platforms. So for us mere mortals and yourself, it's almost, it feels bigger than you can possibly handle, which is why coming together and working together as a government, probably across the board, is really important for Australians anyway. But as we look to the future, and we know that there are certain technologies that will exist. There are certain breakthroughs. We'll probably have quantum. We'll have so many different interacting technologies. What is your, and I hate to say 10 years, so let's say 3. What do you envision Australia looking like if we get it right? If you get it right. Yeah. And you're 100% successful. What does it look like for us?
Yeah, it's a big question. And it goes back for the danger of repeating, it's also not just government. I think it's really important we understand that it's these partnerships. It's government. Government is politicians and parliamentarians, but it's also the public service. And I think the public service has a key role to play in helping. Then you go to the private sector. They can help the private sector because there is a lot of money that is spent at a government level through the public service, and generally they're quite risk adverse around bringing new contractors on, but that stifles innovation and growth. So what do I want us to see? What would I like us to see? A world where uptake in AI is strong and it's providing benefits. There's new businesses starting. The farmers and the tradies of Casey are getting those benefits. What is it? One little tangible example in 3 years, 80% of tradies in Casey, once they do a job, they're using e-invoicing to send it across, and the person pays it straight away. And then that tradie can get to footy training or can go home and spend some time with their family. Like, that is one example of where I'd love to be in 3 years. So the uptake of digital for small business higher, but the uptake higher because they want to do it, because they see the benefits, they see the ROI, they get to go home, they get to earn more money. That's where I think the next level is, because we're already seeing large corporations, large organisations moving forward, and they could probably move a bit quicker if there was more government certainty. So how do we now bring the small businesses up to close the competitive advantage gap that we're seeing? And then people embracing. So the other side to that is people embracing digital, which many younger people already are. So there is a bit of a generational, but feeling safe and secure that if they're online, they don't have to worry as much about scams on Facebook. They don't have to worry as much about are they going to be hacked and things like that. And so they want to take up AI because they see the advantages, not the disadvantages of it. And as a father of a 10 and 12-year-old, I don't want to imagine the education system in 3 years, but I think that is the key element as well that I think about in 3 years. How are we using micro-credentials to upskill people? Like, I'm 41. When I left school in 2002, no one was talking to anyone in our cohort about cybersecurity jobs. So how do we create a world in the next few years where a 42-year-old, 43-year-old who's had a 20-year corporate career in accounting, as an example, and probably in an area that will be disrupted to, potentially, how do they go, well, actually, I want to move across to cybersecurity because it's a growth area. They can't afford to and don't need to go back to university for 4 years because a key part of university is we learn, grow and develop as people. They've already done that. They've proven they're reliable. So how can they go into a 6 to 8 week, 12-week micro-credential introductory course and then go work in an organisation, let's say a bigger organisation to start with, where you get the first basics, or how do they even need to leave the organisation? Can they reskill from accounting to cyber with accredited micro-credentials? If we've got that system up and running in 3 years, I believe that would change how many people fear AI, because then you're talking about tangible examples of how you can reskill and retrain. And there are so many transferable skills. And we're looking at a world where one of my brothers is a coder, a software engineer, and so we chat about,
Sorry to hear.
But two years ago, 2 years ago, everyone or 4 years ago, it's like software engineer, it's weird. So that's where I think, where do I look in? What's the pathway? What's the educational transition pathway that's not pie in the sky, throw money at it, but is actually universities, organisations partnering together to reskill at a quick level, not even reskilling in different industries. Because again, if you go from accounting or coding to cybersecurity,
it's the mindset change as
well. It's a mindset change. It's a very quick, and you can learn on the job. So that's what I think about. And then at a deeper level, when it comes to education, how do we embrace artificial intelligence and realise that how young people learn will change, and how do we actually challenge them around critical thinking? And no longer is the need to remember dates and information. The information's available, and it's changed from encyclopedias to the internet to now artificial intelligence. But the real, in my mind, success comes when you can take all that information and critically analyse it, work out what's valuable, what's real, what's not, and how you build on it. And how do we start to adjust the education system so young people are growing up in an AI world, it can be part of their education, not education in terms of this is how AI works, but education in the sense of how you access information has changed. Now, how do you use that to grow, learn and develop in an education system?
And that's going to be really difficult because we're in this transition stage.
Correct.
And I've got a 10-year-old and a 14-year-old, and they have ChatGPT installed, and I encourage them to use ChatGPT and have conversations with ChatGPT, whereas some of the schools, they have it banned, and so some don't, they're not aware. So we're in this stage where no one's quite sure of how they're going to tackle it. And then I had this worrisome thought about being in my old age and needing a doctor. And the doctor was, at university in 2020 to 2026. And I'll be thinking, oh, great. So this person probably used ChatGPT.
Correct.
So I am a little bit concerned about the leveraging from that technology. But I think it is a moment in time. We're finding our feet. There will be an element of that. But we have, I think as humans, we're all aware that we have some work to do.
Correct.
And we should do it together.
100%. And there's a real element, I look back at my life, and I know everyone or most people do think this, that the biggest growth and development and learning that you have is in the tough times. And I look back at some really tough times I went through in my corporate career, and I go, didn't enjoy it at the time, but I look back and I go, oh, I'm glad that happened. And so one of the challenges to exactly that point is, if we take out all of this friction, but then you go, okay, that's the risk. But history says, again, you think about the information revolution we went through with the internet. And so that made information so much more accessible. So we've already had that kind of revolution. And where I think it ends up is a similar step in terms of you'll have better access to information. Let's be blunt, artificial intelligence isn't magic, it's just maths. So it's going to deliver you a pretty average starting point. And where I see it going potentially is students should use it to get a starting point. It'll give them a skeleton, and then they've got to build on that to become an A paper. And people will go, oh, yeah, but it's already at this starting point. Yeah, but if everyone's using AI to get to the same starting point, then how they use the prompts and how they critically think and how they go deeper and become creative to provide a point of difference then elevates them to an A. Because ultimately education with the system we've got, it's a comparative system. So if everyone's using the tool, and you want them to embrace AI and use the tool because it actually makes them more employable and it makes them better in their private sector life, which then again, they get paid more, we're more sustainable, we're more productive, they get more money to go and spend time with their family. So it would be like us trying to ban the internet in the 90s. We've just got to embrace it. And we've also got to acknowledge, we have this trap, I think, of saying this is, and it is huge and it is transformational, but we've seen it in society. Like the printing press was transformational, and people go, yeah, this is and it is bigger, but we're more global and more connected. And if you think about the printing press, our worlds were smaller back in that time. So the revolution of the printing press was huge for everyone. And I can't remember the exact stat. I'll have to recheck it. But I was reading a book over summer that talked about the advent of the printing press, and the number of books that had been transcribed and written was like in the thousands in all of history. And then as soon as the printing press came, it's gone to the hundreds of thousands overnight. And, back then it was the church and the monasteries, and there were certain knowledge keepers, and it democratized knowledge, and that fundamentally changed society. So we've seen this story before, and every revolution is different, but the principles are the same. So this is going to change how we do it. And the Luddites weren't successful in breaking the printing press. So it's here, it's coming. And that's, again, to go back to the government. They're not Luddite, although there are some Luddites within the government. There's others, probably more on the right, that are understanding what's coming, and they've got a bit of an internal battle that's happening at the moment. But it's here, it's happening. We can't stop it. Let's embrace it. Find the upsides, protect people, and if people are negatively impacted, we need to support them. That's the Australian contract, and that's the Australian way of life. Supporting those that need it, that have been impacted through no fault of their own, helping everyone to get the benefits of it, and ultimately making sure that we're happier, healthier, earning more, supporting our families, supporting our communities. And that's where I want us to get in the next 3 years, and then ultimately in the next 20, 30, 40 years.
I think we're going to close on that, because that is a high note. Thanks for coming on the show, Aaron. It's a pleasure.
Great to be on. Thank you.
You've been listening to The House is Digital, where policy meets innovation. Stay curious, stay inspired, and be part of the movement building Australia's next economy. The future is happening now. See you in the next episode.